Okay. So we are together today because of some amazing partners. So Lydia from Clayton Early Learning is here. Ana from Save the Children Action Network. And Mike, I think you're representing yourself today, yeah? Okay, perfect. And so we are here to kind of support you guys on your journeys and help give you the tools and the confidence and empower you to advocate on behalf of children and families and educators, because you all are experts in early childhood and you have the voice, you have the power, and we're just here to support with that. So before I go any further, I am going to go to the next slide. Um, we have Isao here from the Community Language Cooperative, who is going to give instructions on selecting a language channel for interpretation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Isao Suga, and I'm with the Community Language Cooperative. I'm here to create a space for language justice where people can engage in the language of their hearts. We will be using today's simultaneous interpretation. So when I'm finished saying this part in Spanish, we will turn on interpretation, and you will see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. If you are not fully bilingual, we ask that you select your preferred language. If you're fully bilingual, you can listen to anyone in their language. But when you select your language, you can check the mute original audio so you don't hear both languages at the same time. Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Isao Suga, estoy con el Community Language Cooperative. Estoy aquí para crear un espacio de justicia del lenguaje donde la gente se pueda conectar en el lenguaje de sus corazones. El día de hoy vamos a estar utilizando traducción simultánea y cuando termine esta parte se va a aprender el servicio de interpretación en donde se le pide que por favor le dé el clic al símbolo del mundo para que pueda escoger el lenguaje de su preferencia. Si usted es bilingüe, por favor escoja el lenguaje que usted prefiera y si usted quiere seguirnos de una manera en que no se escuchen los dos idiomas, por favor dele clic en donde dice Mute Original Audio para que no esté escuchando los dos al mismo tiempo. Thank you very much.
I will give folks just a moment to find that interpretation button and select your language channel. All right. Well, I am, just to give you a little bit of information about what to expect for today. First off, if you could take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, tell us where you are tuning in from or what state you practice in. And I apologize, in the evenings, I struggle. So I'm just gonna put that out there. So we do anticipate having time for Q&A at the end of the meeting, but please feel free to type your questions into the chat box as they come up for you, and we will have our panelists address them. And any questions we don't get to will be typed up and sent to all participants along with a recording of the webinar and a few links and documents we believe will come in handy for your advocacy. Tonight's presentation, including the slides, will be presented in both English and Spanish. And we've met Isao, so once again, if you haven't selected your language channel, please do so. I am going to move forward. So, oh, I'm in the wrong, here we go. I have two windows open. All right, so our presenters for this evening. So today we have Sonia Samada, who is joining us as our chair-elect at the Colorado Association for the Education of Young Children and as an early childhood educator. Mike Browne, who is an infant toddler educator and co-host of Napcast, a podcast available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Ana Bustamante, who is the Colorado State Manager from Save the Children Action Network. And Lydia Waligorski. Did I say your name right, Lydia? Director of Policy and Advocacy at Clayton Early Learning. And do we have a document that has everybody's bios? Is that a thing? I noticed that in the notes, so I just wanted to check and make sure. If not, that is totally fine.
We will send that out when we send out the
Okay.
recording. Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, with all of that said, I am going to hand you over to Mike, who is going to get us started.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Es un placer estar con ustedes hoy. My name is Mike Browne. My pronouns are he, him. I am the co-host of Napcast, a podcast co-hosted by two male early childhood educators of color, where we explore the intersection of culture, teaching, and identity in early learning. My co-host, who's not here today, Nick Torones, he's Mexican Indigenous. I'm the Afro-Caribbean one, and you can listen to our podcast wherever you podcast, Apple, Spotify, you get the gist. Or you can follow us on the Instagram at Napcast206. Come on, baby. Get up. Get dressed. We have to go, my mom gently said. My eyes slowly opened to see my mom already dressed with her car keys in her hand. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the night, I remember seeing the time had just struck 2 a.m. And as I hurried out of bed, I put on my thickest winter coat because it'd be cold in New York. I grabbed my mom's emergency bag filled with snacks for the ride, a binder of paperwork, and other items to help soothe the toddler we were on our way to pick up who was in need. I was just shy of my 7th birthday when these calls started to come in the middle of the night. And for the next 10 years, despite my teachers calling it a disturbance in my house, despite my friends calling it annoying, I saw it as one thing. I saw it as justice, safety, and advocacy in action. See, my mom, she ran an in-home childcare center. It was warm, it was chaotic, it was full of finger paint and tiny shoes. But it was more than just a childcare center. It was a hub of safety, trust, and deep community connection. Nights like those, especially as the snow covered the ground, were no stranger to me. I remember hearing the phone ring at odd hours at all the time. My mom was part of a program through CPS, Child Protective Services, and later on, even after removing her services from that list, she was so well known throughout the community that when families needed emergency care or had nowhere else to turn, they called her. No spotlight, no policy behind it, just a commitment she had to showing up. That, to me, is advocacy. Quiet, consistent, community-rooted. Before I even knew the word, I saw it in action. I saw how my mom's actions were a bridge to a world in which some of us on this call might see as scary or complicated. A world where my mom showed me that you don't need to stand at a podium or draft legislation to be heard. A world where all we have to do is to continue to ask and question, how can our systems better recognize and support people loving and caring for their children? A world where every time I'm in the infant room at my program and I notice the smallest of signals, be it a tight fist, a missed nap, a parent's sigh, I respond with care. That's advocacy. A world where every time I'm invited into other early learning spaces as a coach and consultant, and I'm helping people connect their grassroots care with system level thinking, AKA bridging the micro and the macro. And I'm reminding people that they are more than just an educator. They are change makers. That's advocacy. A world where every time I make space for a child, a parent, an educator in crisis, even though I am bone tired myself, and I'm choosing to engage in intergenerational healing and love, that's advocacy. Today, as we talk about policies and advocacy in early childhood education, I want us to hold space for these unsung advocates, to hold space for yourselves, because you are those advocates. It's already who you are and what you are and what you do today. And today, this conversation is about furthering your commitment to building systems that sees us, that supports us, that learns from us. And that's okay if you don't have the policy language or a seat at the table. Neither did my mom. But that's why we're here today. Yes, to get some of the official language down, so when we show up, we can show up with the language, the tools, and the skills that the system wants us to have. But also, we're here to remind people and systems that they work for us. Our advocacy isn't measured by how loud we are, but by how deeply we care. Although it won't hurt to send this link to a friend right now, right? There's still time to join, right? Maybe we can drop that link in the chat right now. Because the future of early childhood education isn't just about laws. It's about love. It's about labor and the quiet leadership of people who are on this call today. And so, my friends, let's keep showing up like my mom did. With love, with listening, with the belief that every baby deserves more than just a system or a classroom. They deserve a village. But here's the thing. My mom should not have had to do all of that alone. Love fueled her work. Next slide. Love fueled her work. But it was never backed by sustainable supports, funding, or recognition. What she gave, her time, her care, her home, was priceless, but it came at a cost. And that's where policy comes in. Because policy is what turns individual acts of care into collective responsibility. Policy is what ensures that caregivers like my mom aren't just filling in the gaps, but they are fully resourced, they are respected and protected in doing the work they're already doing. When we talk about early childhood educational policy, we're not talking about abstract legislation. We're talking about whether a parent can afford to send their child somewhere safe, whether a caregiver has access to mental health supports and a livable wage, whether a child in crisis gets more than just a referral, but a wraparound village, whether community care is seen as valid, it's funded, and worthy of protection. That's why policy in ECE matters. That's why comprehensive federal policies that ensures each provider in your state, in your city, in your community has adequate compensation, benefits, and support for the professional growth. Public policy, advocacy, school board meetings, federal bills, local councils, local elections, ballot measures, all of that matters because all of them can improve quality of early care and education. And they all exist for a reason. In order to carry out their responsibilities, public officials require and welcome the advice that well-informed people like you provide. We improve the lives of children, families, community members, educators, and early childhood staff by influencing legislators and policymakers' opinions and activities. And when we finally learn how to speak the language of systems, we finally learn how to co-collaborate together and still keep our souls, we then can finally be able to shape policies that reflects our values, our labor, and our love. But let me repeat this once again for the people in the back, as we see on our next slide. Because I don't think y'all really heard me. The systems at hand are doing exactly what it is intended to do. It is pitting us against each other. They are giving us $5 and they are laughing as they see us fight over the crumbs that they give us. Oh, I'm Head Start and you're Montessori. We can't possibly collaborate. Oh, I'm an outdoor preschool and you're a home-based provider. We can't talk to one another. Instead of turning our attention to the system, we are turning against one another. And I know most of the focus right now is on Head Start and the attack on that institution. And there are some people out here that are saying, well, I don't work for Head Start, so that's not my problem. But I'm here to remind you all this. What we do for Head Start is what we do for early childhood education. What we do for families is what we do for community. What we do for community is what we do for justice. What we do for justice is what we do for our environment. And what we do for the environment, we do for every child's future. What we do for children, as my homeboy, I got a dog in the background, it's agreeing with me. I don't know if you can hear, but it's agreeing with me. What we do for children, as my homeboy Nick Taronis would say, is what we do for humanity. Much work still has to be done, but we can't do it alone. Despite recent investments, almost 60% of children in low-income countries still do not have access to early care and learning opportunities. To meet national targets of providing at least 1 year of organized learning before primary schools, low-income and lower middle-income countries must fill an annual financial gap of $21 billion and recruit at least 6 million more educators before 2030. The point I'm trying to make is we don't live in a vacuum. All of our work is interconnected, and we can't do it alone. This isn't just a gap we're talking about. This is global injustice. We need policymakers to invest. We need you to advocate. We need a renewed commitment collectively to increase funding to support early childhood education, both domestically and internationally. Next.
Mike, thank you so much for setting that scene and grounding us in our why. Tonight, if I had known I had to speak right after you and you were going to be so powerful, I probably would have given the slide to someone else, but thank you, my friend. Hello, everyone. My name is Lydia Waligorski, and I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Clayton Early Learning. I am, as Mike and some people would refer to me as a systems type person, the person who lives and works among these regulations and legislation and all of those big things. And so we wanted to take a moment tonight and this week and provide this really kind of this rapid response webinar, right? And so we didn't have a whole lot of time to put this together, but we really felt that as things were moving through Congress and as things were happening with early childhood education and the developments that are happening at the federal and ultimately the state level, that we really needed to take a moment and ground ourselves and to teach some advocacy skills and really hope to get people involved. And so right now, we have the big, beautiful bill that is working its way through Congress that passed the House and is now onto the Senate. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little about the state budget woes that a lot of us are experiencing, some federal actions and changes, and really this is your time and space to, learn some of those terms, to feel that you absolutely can do this and step into that space. And so you can really most effectively advocate for the children and the families that we serve every day. And Anola's going to help us out by pushing our slides. And so next slide, Miss Anola. Go back one. Okay, thanks. Okay, so we have a little bit of information in terms of the big, beautiful bill and the budget reconciliation process. And so your inboxes might look like ours, where it is every day there is some new information of what is actually in this, what has been dubbed the big, beautiful bill, which is 1,000 pages that was passed by the House last week. And we think the Senate is going to take out before the July 4th holiday. This is done through a separate process than appropriations, but the budget reconciliation process is something that Congress can do when they have a trifecta or a majority in the federal Senate and the House of Representatives and, of course, the presidency. And so budget reconciliation is something that can be used to set top lines for appropriations. And so when we think about programs like Head Start, and we think about funding that comes down through the Community Development Block Grants, which handles a lot of our low-income and childcare services across our states. When we think of SNAP, and we think of Medicaid, and we think of all of these things that are in the federal budget, the budget reconciliation is going to set these top lines in terms of this is what you can spend, like here's the $5, right? And then the appropriations process, which is going to follow after budget reconciliation, is going to set which each of those programs can spend. And so while these are two different timelines and two different processes, they really will start to work together. And so we wanted to demystify that process for you tonight and talk a little bit about what we know is in the big budget bill and the impact that it's likely to have on the families that we serve. And in fact, whether you are, from a blue state or a red state or a purplish state like Colorado or whatever your own political leaning is, what is in this bill right now as it is written, and while we do think we will see some significant amendments in the Senate, no matter what passes, it's going to have a real impact on the programs that support the kiddos that we serve and really our communities as the whole. And so as our whole community, We know that when Medicaid gets cut, our Head Start families lose access to their health insurance. We know our veterans lose access to their health insurance. We know that the budget reconciliation process and the debt ceiling is tied up to this, that as slashes to Medicaid happen, we'll eventually get to slashing Medicare as well because the debt ceiling will be so high. And so this will impact healthcare for an estimated 15 million people. We also know that our benefits for things like food security and our SNAP benefits, our supplemental nutrition assistance program, and our school lunch programs for many of our states is also tied into this big, beautiful bill, and things there are slated for cuts as well and slashes. And so there's a lot of action alerts that are happening right now. All of those are good things to engage in, but we want to make sure that you feel comfortable engaging on the issues that matter to you most and the issues that matter to the kids that we are serving the most as well. And we're going to post information and through the chat as we go along this evening. Also, please do ask your questions, put them into the chat. We'll come to them at the end. If we don't get to questions, we'll write those up and get them to you as well. So there's a lot of analysis that's coming out almost daily about what is in this bill, but just know that this is a separate process from the appropriations process as well. And next slide, please. All right. So state and federal budgets. And so unlike our federal budget, where we can run a large deficit, and the deficit is now to a point where it is controlling a lot of the things that we can do at the state level and the federal level. States have to balance a budget every year, and states receive dollars from the federal government in the way of grants, block grants. CCDBG might be one that you're familiar with, where those are the grants that come to states to say, here's our pot of money for low income access to childcare. You might be familiar with Head Start. You might be familiar with the PDG, Birth to 5 grant, which is the preschool development grant from birth to 5. You might be familiar with the campus grant, which provides childcare for parents that are going to higher education. So all of those things come from the federal government. They're given to the states. The states send that out the door into our communities for the most part. When we talk about the shrinking of a federal budget, we're actually talking about the shrinking of a state budget as well, because the state will then have less to be able to push out to their partners. And so whatever happens at the federal level is going to happen at the state level. Now you say, okay, so wait, Lydia, so states actually send money to the federal government, and this is true. But they also have a state budget, and a lot of the things that are in the bill and that are being proposed right now actually put more work onto the states and different requirements onto the states to kick up more of the federal share. So it is a double whammy in terms of we'll see a reduction at what the feds are giving us, and we'll see more of an increase of what the states are asked to do. And so state governments around the United States, every state government this year is looking for, has had some sort of a budget crisis or some sort of a cutback. And a lot of that is a contraction of what they have had available to them under the American Rescue Plan or those ARPA dollars that we've relied on for so long. And then the other piece of it is just there's less coming down from the Fed at this point, largely because of ARPA as well. And so this is going to be a push-pull that is not going to be limited to just this year. We're going to see this in the next few years. And so, building that muscle and building those advocacy muscles on behalf of early education and behalf of the families we serve is really important, because this is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. And so while we have some things that we really are concerned and frankly don't like in budget reconciliation, these are things that we're also going to have to keep advocating for and keep fighting for in our state legislatures as well as our federal governments. And so we're going to come back to this. We're going to keep posting those resources, but I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend, Sonia, who's going to talk about what educators can do.
Well, where do educators come in, right? everything we know, like anything that has to do with policy, you know, whatever decisions are made, you know, that are out of our purview, end up impacting what we do. Whether it's, you know, Medicaid or Medicare being cut and children can no longer get their dental exams or the immunizations done, but they're walking in your door and parents are asking you for resources. You know, we have to make sure that, you know, our voices are being heard. We can't let people continue telling us, you know, to do this and to do that, but they're not giving us the resources to get that job done. You know, Mike so eloquently said, you know, we do have a scarcity of educators. We need, you know, I know as a director, when I was a director, you know, it was hard to find qualified early childhood educators. It was hard to, you know, when I did find those qualified early childhood educators, to invite them into my center, but I couldn't pay them what they were worth. They would always look at me and they'll say, Sonia, I love to stay in this field. I want to do this work, you know, but, you know, I have to pay student loans, or I have to, you know, cost of living is really high. And, you know, to this day, I had a teacher come to me and say, Sonia, I don't know, you know, I need to get new glasses, but I also need to pay my rent. I don't know whether I'm going to continue paying on my insurance because, you know, my check just goes so far. So, you know, it's those little things, right? We want to make sure that we're honoring the work that you as an educator is doing. So our voices are important and need to be heard. We need to share our stories of how these policies and how these budget cuts are really impacting the work that we're doing in the classroom, that we're doing for our educators and for our community and our children. Let's go to the next slide. So tonight we're going to break it down a little bit. You know, you're already doing a lot of the advocacy work when you show up. You know, as a couple of you who are, you know, daycare owners, you know, when you show up and you turn on your lights and you provide this amazing environment for young children, and you provide a safe home for children and families to come into, you know, that is a lot of advocacy work that you're doing. But tonight we're going to go a little deeper. We're going to talk about policy and how policies impact us. You all know this, you know, when we have a licensing policy, it impacts the work that we're trying to do with children, right? So how do we make our voice be heard in any arena where policies are being made that are going to trickle down and impact the quality of work that we're trying to do? So we're going to talk a little bit about policy, advocacy, you know, and how can we lobby? What is lobbying and how do we get involved? You're not going to do this alone tonight. You're going to do this as part of our community. Feel free to drop your questions, your curiosities into the chat. We're going to collect those. We're going to dissect them together. And then if we can't follow up with you tonight, we're going to keep in contact with you. So why should we care about this, right? You know why that's why you're here today. We should care about this because what happens up above ends up impacting you and your local state, and your local city, and your local community. So we have to have our finger on the pulse. We have to share our stories. You know, I had one educator tell me that they went up to the Capitol and they went to meet up with their state legislator. And the legislator really honestly said, you know what? There's so much noise going on around education. We don't know what to listen to, but thanks for coming into my office and sharing the story of what's happening in your community, because I'm going to share your story when I go in and talk to my colleagues that are making these policies or are sitting on these committees that are making these decisions. And I thought that is powerful. And it's, you know, and it just reminds us, you know, for us who have been directors, who have all this noise coming to us, sometimes it's really hard if we don't have our help to keep our finger on every issue that's going on. So we have to make sure as educators, we're making calls, we're having our voice heard, we're writing those letters, you know, where if you can go up to the Capitol with NYC when they have their policy day and they're meeting in Washington, D.C., and they take a group of people. So we're going to talk about how to get involved. Some of you might be saying, Sonia, but I'm a nonprofit. You know, I don't want to get fired. I need my job. Or, hey, I have all these grants. I don't want people to come into my front door and take these grants away from me. So how do I make my voice heard? How do I, you know, keep my finger in the pulse? But I'm a nonprofit. How do I do this? We're going to talk about federal funding, the regulations that are coming down. We'll give you a quick snippet. And we're going to amplify the message tonight. So about being in community and lifting each other up. You're already doing a lot of this work in many different ways. So we're going to share just a little bit more tidbits tonight. Next slide. So Lydia, let's talk about what is advocacy, right? Mike already let us know. Many of us already do it in the classroom.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sonia. You are absolutely already doing this every day. whether you know it or not, whatever you call it or whatever you don't call it, you speak up for kids and you speak up for families. And so anytime that you are talking in favor of, you're recommending, you're arguing for a cause, you're supporting or defending or pleading on behalf of others, you are an advocate. And we know that you are advocates in your own community. And so sometimes these words get a scary rap or a bad rap because sometimes they're tied with those complications that Sonia brought up in terms of being tied to nonprofit funding or federal funding. We're going to demystify that. But right now, you guys need to understand that you are already advocates and you already have everything you need to do to be able to do this work. Next slide, please. So something that goes with advocacy, right? So it's usually advocacy and policy. I'm the director of policy and advocacy, yada, yada. So when we talk about policy, we're talking about this is the law or the regulation or procedure, administrative action, some sort of practice on behalf of governments or other institutions. And so we can think of this in terms of big P and little p. And so big P, I think of these are the laws that get passed by a governing body, whether that be at our state houses or Congress. And then little p is kind of everything else. And those are the regulations that implement the laws. Those are, things that are also, internal, right? In terms of that little p is your policies that you have at your school or your organization in terms of what happens if a parent doesn't show up to pick up their kiddo on time. What's our policy? What happens if, we have a teacher call out because they are sick that day? And so we have these internal policies, and we think of those as big P and little p. The little p policies should, on a good day, inform the big P policies, right? And so we should be able to say, here's the real world, here's what we're seeing, and here's what I need you to do, lawmaker, to make this better for me and to make this better for the kids and families that I serve. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that. And sometimes when it doesn't work like that, we have to go to lobbying. And lobbying is not a dirty word. Lobbying, next slide, please. Lobbying is really just showing up and having those courageous conversations with our decision makers, right? And so if you're talking to somebody that has the ability to take a vote or has the ability to draft legislation or oppose legislation or can make actual policy, and we have a conversation and we say, it'd be really good. And we say, I want to do X. And we say, will you do this for me? That's lobbying. If we say, it'd be really good, and you just say, I think we need a policy on X, Y, and Z, that's advocacy. So unless all of the elements of direct lobbying are there, where you have someone that can make a decision, or their staff, someone, direct, like, their staffers count in that, and you're asking them to make a decision, whether that is to draft legislation or oppose legislation or stop something from being drafted or vote a certain way. If those things don't line up and you don't have those elements in place, it's advocacy. It's not lobbying. And so there are dozens of trainings that we could do on this part alone. There are dozens of organizations and attorneys that will help you figure this out. But really just know at the heart that you can be an advocate with your decision makers, with your elected officials, with your policymakers, and be a really awesome toes in the line advocate without ever having to lobby. And if you do lobby, you can, and you absolutely should do that. And so we're going to talk about that next. Next slide, please. Okay. So when we talk about lobbying, we talk about working with our legislators and meeting them. That's direct lobbying, right? And so we also have something called grassroots lobbying. And grassroots lobbying involves you trying to influence an entire population. And so think of this as a yard sign that you put up saying, vote yes on Amendment C, right? Whatever that is for you in your area. And so you are trying to take your argument to the people and into grassroots and say, I want you to consider these things and vote a certain way. That's grassroots lobbying. And that is also completely allowed for nonprofits to do, for schools to do, and certainly for you as individuals. to happen. And so just know that there's two different types of lobbying, and that matters if you are an organization or acting on behalf of an organization. If you are a regular person doing this in your own free time, both of those things are fantastic. There's no limits on you as an individual. Okay, so if we go to our next slide, we also want to make sure that you are aware of what is happening in your own state. And so each state has different rules on lobbying and different limits. And so using Colorado, where I'm from and where I work, as an example, Colorado defines lobbying a little bit broader than what the Internal Revenue Service does. And so Colorado defines anytime we're talking to a covered official for the purpose of influencing legislative or regulatory activities. And so say rulemaking, say licensing standards for early educators. If we're trying to influence there, Colorado says, okay, that's lobbying. But the IRS, where most people think of lobbying and this conundrum between what I can do for a nonprofit, does not count that as lobbying. And so just know that your state, in addition to the IRS rules, may have some additional caveats or instances in there. And there are fantastic resources. We're going to give those to you. And when we send out the notes and drop them in the chat to groups like Boulder Advocacy that have state by state specific information on how you can engage as an advocate. And so if we go to our next slide and we say, but wait a minute, I work for a school or for a nonprofit. Absolutely. And this is the part where people get really nervous in the presentation, right? But you have to know the difference between advocacy and lobbying, right? And so if all of those elements are not there and you're saying, this is a great policy, or Head Start needs more dollars, or I wish you guys would know and understand that if mom loses Medicaid, kid is not going to make it to those early childhood health visits. All of that advocacy, right? So knowing the difference between advocacy and lobbying and walking that like a drunken sailor is great. You just have to know which one you're doing when. The greatest rule I can tell you to be absolutely safe is to do all this on your own time with your own technology if you are and know who you are representing. And so if you are representing yourself, you can go to town. You can call every day, and you should call every day at this point, and talk to them about what you believe in, because you're a constituent and you get to say these things. And now, if you're representing a school or if you're representing your nonprofit, then we do suggest, you've got a limit, you've got to track your time. You've got to know what you're doing, whether it's grassroots or direct lobbying, and there's ways to track your time for representing someone. One thing I like to do personally is take advantage of time zones. And so I'm in Mountain Time Zone. And so that means that DC is 2 hours ahead of me. And so at 7 o'clock in the morning, when I am rushing out the door with my kiddo, it's 9 o'clock. And so the offices in DC are open. And so I call almost every day about all sorts of things, right? And so I care about national parks. And so I'm calling about that this week. I care about people having school breakfast and lunches. And so I call about those things. And I call about those as my own individual person from my personal cell phone, before work time. And I can call and talk about whatever I want. And then I get to the office, and then I got to do, lobbying and policy and advocacy on behalf of the school, which is fantastic. And that's when I get to call and say, hey, this is really going to impact the students and teachers that we work with every day. And that's a little bit more measured, and because I'm representing a school at that point. So you absolutely can do this. You can do this as a person, and there's no limitation. If you are representing your school, or you work for a nonprofit, or you receive federal funding, you absolutely can and should do this. You just have to follow the rules. Okay. And next slide. We're just going to briefly go over some of those rules, and the rule is record keeping. Okay. So again, you can do this for an entire webinar. There's fantastic webinars. There's fantastic help. You don't have to navigate this by yourself. It is not as hard as you think it is. As long as you delineate timesheets and you know how much time you're spending on grant tracking and how much time you're spending for direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying, You can calculate this and you can do it on behalf of your nonprofit. And nonprofits can and should do this. There's two ways for nonprofits to measure this. You can measure this in terms of, I'm a big organization and the time that I spend on lobbying, both state and federal, is an insubstantial part of our overall total budget. And so if you work for an organization that has a budget of $1 million and you spend 2 hours a month or even 2 hours a week lobbying, like actual lobbying, where you're like, Senator, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, you're not going to make this substantial part test. Like, you're fine because you're not spending a big substantial amount of the dollars that you have coming into your organization on lobbying. A lot of nonprofits choose to do the H designation. And so if you've been around nonprofits for any amount of time, you know that nonprofits file something called an IRS 990 form. And the 990 form has an H designation, and your H designation is where you keep track of the times that you spend lobbying. And that H designation helps you tell a picture to your funders in terms of how engaged you are in the greater good, how engaged you are in working through some of these wicked policy problems, and that can also be helpful in telling your organizational story. So we have a lot of nonprofits that can and do this all day, every day, ours included. And so if you want more information, we're happy to share that with you. We're going to give you just a taste of these in the chat and in the slide deck, and then certainly we can help you find more information in terms of where to go. Okay. To wrap that part up, we're going to go through this little diagram here. Next slide. Thank you. Okay. So you can provide advocacy in terms of these are the things I wish we had in the world. You can also lobby and you can say, hey, I want you to go get me the things that I wish I had in the world, elected official. I'm your constituent. I want you to go get these things for me. And you can go down to the Capitol and you can provide testimony when a bill hearing is happening or when you get invited to speak at Congress or whatever that can be. That testimony is absolutely allowed as well. Sometimes testimony is not even considered lobbying, depending on your state and depending on how you got there. Most of the times it is, and it's going to be under the IRS definition of lobbying, and so you're providing testimony. But again, it's not the 6 hours that you waited for your turn to speak at the Capitol. It's the 3 minutes you got at the Capitol, and it's the hour that you spent writing your testimony. And it's all of these things that led up to that. But again, there's a big difference between advocacy and lobbying. There's a big difference between lobbying and testimony. We can help navigate those things, but just know they are allowable. And the IRS says they are allowable, and they always have been. And so the only thing you cannot do, and the thing that we do caution against, that is a no-no, is participating in any political campaign activity or for a candidate. And so you can support ballot initiatives, you can put signs in your yard as long as it's not for a political candidate. And there's some rules around how you can work with candidates. But even those, I don't want you to be afraid of those. We have done, as part of this group and part of others, we did a mayoral forum where we had all of the mayor candidates for Denver come to our school and hold a candidate forum. We hold the same thing for local elections. We've held events around what is on the ballot and having conversations around that. And so lean into what you can do, because it is a lot more than what most people I realize. And so I'm going to turn it over to back to Mike real quick, who's going to talk a little bit more about working in coalition now that we have these terms and we know the language that is commonly used among people that play in this space.
So I've been recently inspired by the legacy of the Rainbow Coalition. For context, the Rainbow Coalition was a multiracial, multi-issue political movement formed in the late 60s, 1960s. It united working class Black, white, Latinx communities around struggles against poverty, police violence, racism, and systemic injustice. It was actually one of the very first coalitions in US history to intentionally bridge racial divides for collective liberation. And so when I think about working in coalitions with people from Denver, Des Moines, Iowa, Lubbock, Texas, White Plains, New York, Virginia, San Diego, I think about the Rainbow Coalition. I think about how our advocacy is not charity, it's solidarity. It's how we show up for one another. So how do we keep each other informed? Continue to share stories, resources, our truths. Because this moment grows when we all know what's happening. So keep teaching each other the truth about capitalism, about the isms, about power. These are just as essential as food and shelter. Elevate voices, elevate issues. Call, email, text, fax, find a carrier pigeon, find anything to get the word out. But speak up. Make sure decision makers hear from the people closest to the ground. And also remember, you don't just need to advocate for systems already in place. We can build parallel ones as well. We can build free clinics, educational programs, tenant unions. Elevating voices means building platforms, not just begging for one. Evaluate information sources. Power thrives on misinformation. So stay sharp, share wisely. I'm sure there's a course out there that has people thinking about how can you tell what is real, what is fake. Take those courses. Protect the truth. Question everything. Be like a toddler. Be like the toddler in my class. They say why a million times. Let us be more like toddlers. Ask why, especially when it protects the status quo. Take action, both individually and collectively. Whether it's signing a petition or organizing a community meeting, every act matters. We might not all have the same fight, but we all got the same goal in mind. So continue to honor all forms of action, from protest to mutual aid. The real power is when we move together, because that's when solidarity becomes strategy. Finally, rest. Rest as an act of resistance. We can't burn out if we want to build. And so heal. Take care of yourselves. Lean into your community. Be vulnerable. My homeboy Amir said on my podcast, in order to beat the system, you need to outlast the system. In order to beat the system, you need to outlast the system. So take your PTO. Take it. I got one coming up. I can't wait. Don't call me. Don't hit me up. Take your PTO. They're there for a reason. Log off the computer. Not right now, right? Finish this presentation first, but then log off the computer. That email is going to be there tomorrow in your inbox. Trust me. You don't have to answer it today. Rest is a political act. Rest is not you retreating from the front lines. It's preparation.
So you're hearing us and, saying, Enola, Lydia, Mike, Sonia, Anna, what? I don't have have time. And if I call these people, these state representatives, what do I tell them? There are just so many different things coming down, so much information. Mike just shared with us, it's sometimes really hard to discern what's real, what's not, So I know, and plus, we're asking you to do your day-to-day job, right? Opening your hearts, and doors to families and children. Well, this is a pretty neat resource, something that you can download on your phone, or you can just log on. We have that little arrow showing you like the link. But Five Calls is a nonprofit organization. It's a 501 nonprofit, and it just makes life a little easier. When you play around with this link or you download it on your phone, you choose like a policy that you're very interested in, or that it's going to impact your work as an educator, as a human being, as a caring person in your community. You click on it, it'll give you like this really great brief information about what this policy, entails, and financially what it's going to impact. But then it also asks you, if you put in your zip code, it'll let you know, like, hey, these are things that are happening, around your area, and these are some of your representatives that you can contact. You click on your representatives, and it also gives you a script that you can follow. So you don't have to come up with like, what words do I use? How do I eloquently, talk to these people? Well, you'll get the direct phone, but you also get this nice script that tells you, what to say, how to say it if you need it. And then you oftentimes can leave a message, right? Saying who you are, share your story, and there's people out there listening to this. Your representatives will be listening to this. And these stories are so important. Like I said, they can't keep their eye on everything, but if we keep on calling and making our voices heard of how these decisions and policies are impacting us, it does make a difference. And it also, the 5call.org also lets you know other people who are calling in regards to these policies. So you actually also get that sense that you're not by yourself. It's really easy. You can do it like on your lunch break. You can do it when you're off work. You can do it in your own time. But I like it just because when I first used it, I was just thinking, well, what do I say once I call? And there's so many policies. What policy am I gonna like want to focus on? Well, it gives you not only information about policy, it gives you who are your representatives, it gives you their number, and it gives you a script. So it's really easy. I don't have it on my phone. I tend to use the link that just what makes me feel more comfortable, but you can also easily download it on your phone. It's a really easy link and really easy process to use. And if anything, just keeping in touch with a summary of what policies that are coming down the line that are going to impact you, I think it's just a great resource. Next slide. So a couple of things, just working with elected officials, we have our senators, we have our House of Representatives, Colorado has 8 districts, California has 52, and I can spill some more numbers of other states. But just to get down to it, you want to make sure who are your representatives and hold them accountable for doing the job that they need to do. Let them hear from you, your stories. It's really easy, just remind yourself these people are human beings as well. Share your stories of how, what you need them to do when they're in these meetings or subcommittees that are making these big decisions about education and about, how to finance teacher preparation programs, financial aid, Medicare, Medi-Cal. That's, it's always important to know who are your local representatives, but who also are your representatives at large. Next slide. So many of you already do this, make sure that, I know that some of you are owners of schools, how do you become a resource for your teachers? Feel free to share these slides with them, talk about them. Maybe you host a meeting at your center and you talk about the information that you've learned tonight, right? Or you share some notes, or you just share these slides with your local community and you see what other questions they might have. I also want to say, invite your local representatives for a tour of your center. Let them see, what real life looks like and how, these policies are really impacting their community at a local level. Because sometimes in reality, they just don't know. And when they need to know, they need to feel it. I think when I did it during COVID, when we were advocating for more, financial assistance to keep our doors open for PPE. I invited our local representatives, and I even had a parent who was willing to share the story of how important it was for our lab school to stay open in order for this parent to go to work and in order for their child, to feel safe in an environment and to be amongst their friends. Schedule time for coffee with them, just say, hey, I just need 5 minutes of your time. Let me give you a quick tour. Let me talk to you about what we do here and how we do it and what we need from you. Next slide. So here are some key things. Once you have a visitor, come into your center or local representative, you want to make sure, yeah, you want them to hear, your woes, but you also want to share the real life stories that they can walk away with and they can talk to their colleagues about. You might want to share a story about yourself or what keeps you doing what you're doing, right? Because we do a lot of great work. We need to make sure that they understand that this is not just a willy-nilly job where we just turn on the lights. This is a community building, right? We are a support system to many of our communities, and I think people need to hear that. So when they come into your center, reminding them, right? Letting them know like how important their job is to represent you and to represent the children and families and communities that we serve. Maybe shorten down your agenda because sometimes these people are super busy. Stick to 3 things that are really important to you so that they walk away and not only like what I need from you, but how I need it. They need to know like what exactly is the want that you're asking of them. So know what you're asking when you invite someone into your center. Maybe you invite them to do like Read Across America Day, right? To read a book. And while they're there, you're just, by the way, let me tell you how important literacy is. And when you take away these grants, this makes it my job a little bit more difficult. So share those type of things with them. They're really, what many of our representatives are so down to earth that they just need to hear and be reminded why they got elected. Next slide. So make sure, be attentive to the member of their position, their comments. I know like in our state, we have this whole thing about, funding that was being cut, in many ways in our state. And we have to remind people like, know who has their finger in the pulse, right? Not all of our representatives do the same thing. We'll share some great resources to tell you a little bit about subcommittees that sit on committees such as Education Committee, the early education committees that make these decisions. There's many different subcommittees, but we'll share with you information about the subcommittees strictly that land on early education. So who is part of these committees that are sitting at the table when we can't be there. Remember, when they sit at the table, they're sitting at that table to represent our needs. Next slide. Just really quickly, don't forget to follow up on your ask when you meet someone. Send them a quick email after their visit. Send them those points of like, hey, remember what we talked about? We talked about X, Y, and Z. Many of them will continue getting back to you. This is just a picture that I wanted to share because for some reason I think as educators we felt really empowered during COVID. Like people were listening, like, how do you open your doors? I know for me as a director during that time, I felt like they were just throwing money at me. And I was like, whoa, where's all this money coming from? So the money is there. We just got to remind them how important our work is, how important our work is to our community that we serve and that they serve as well. Next slide.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sonia. And remember, too, we were and we are essential to the workforce, right? If we are not there to provide safe environments for our youngest learners, many parents cannot go to work without putting their kids in danger. And so we are still essential workers, and we have to remind people of that from time to time. And so we've had some great tips and tricks in terms of, how do I have these conversations? How do I start? I'm going to start with a phone call. What am I going to say if I'm in the room with them? We've had, some things in terms of here's how to structure an in-person meeting. And those are not the only ways to engage. When we go back to that little P piece, we recognize that rulemaking across our state legislatures is also very important in terms of we are licensed professionals, and the licensure standards and the rulemaking and things like how many kids we can have in a classroom safely and how do we have to feed kids in the classroom every day. All of that happens through a rulemaking process. And those are also places where you can weigh in. And so in Colorado, just as an example, you can find that rulemaking through our Secretary of State's office or through our Department of Regulatory Affairs. This is called different things in different states. And then when it comes to federal rulemaking, and so when Congress changes laws, they're supposed to then issue rules, or the departments that are issuing rules about how we're going to change, how we're going to implement those law changes, or how we're going to spend those big monetary changes, should really go through the Federal Register, which is how Congress gets feedback on the rules that they're proposing in terms of how we operate as Head Start, how we operate in early childhood, how we get those CCDBG funds out the door. Next slide, please. And so just a friendly reminder, maybe this is an introduction to folks, you can weigh in on those federal laws, and please do. And so occasionally you'll get these letters that say, sign on to these comments for the Federal Register. And I'm here to tell you, my friends, your comments on the Federal Register are needed. They are vitally important, and they have to be unique. They actually have to be 30% unique from the last person that left a comment. And here's why. They scan the comments, and if it's just I signed on to this, that gets counted as one comment. If your comment is 30% unique, that's great. That's an individual comment. And so when groups go and hold the federal government accountable for, hey, we warned you about this. We said not to do the rule that way, and here's 500 comments saying don't do it this way. And then when bad things happened, we're taking those comments and we're taking those in the courtroom, and we're taking those and holding account. And so right now, and there's always comments in the Federal Register that are up for debate. Right now, to my knowledge, there's nothing specific to early childhood, but one thing you can do is call your organizations and say, I want to hold a Federal Register comment making party where you all log on to a forum like this, you talk about the rules, and you just go for it right there. You just log in and you do your comments. And so just know that that is out there, and that is another really great way to engage. We also have advocacy in terms of being on the ballot. Just for example, Colorado, we have no less than 6 different ways or pathways to get on the state ballot, and that we know that varies state to state, but your ballot initiatives are really important for getting rules passed and getting things done, especially funding for early childhood education and local governments. And so it is really important to vote down ballot. Next slide, please. Nonprofits can and should support ballot work as what, sorry, next slide. My bad. Nonprofits can support the ballot work as well, right? You can put that sign in your yard. Depending on your state, any work on your ballot may or may not even be lobbying. Under the IRS, it just completely depends on where you're at. You still can't support candidates, but local measures really matter in terms of, I know Colorado has local lodging taxes, and those lodging taxes support early childhood education. And so finding that niche and finding out what is on your ballot can really be helpful, or even, dare say, running a ballot initiative yourselves. Like 25 and 26, we're going to have some early education things on the ballot here in our state. Next slide, please. Right, and now is the time. And so those keywords that we talked about in terms of where to find this funding, what am I talking about? All of the budget stuff for early childhood education is going to come from non-defense discretionary spending, right? And so we have the discretionary spending, which is the pot of money that Congress gets to appropriate every year. We have the military budget, then we have the non-defense discretionary. That's where our budget's set. And while there are multiple different federal agencies that implement some sort of ECE or early childhood support, the main agencies are going to be Health and Human Services, and again, that Administration of Children and Youth and Families. And so HHS, or Health and Human Services, is really the linchpin for things like SNAP, Medicaid, those CCDBG funds, HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Funds. And so that's an important committee, and that committee that Sonia was referring to is Labor H, which is in the House and the Senate. And again, more information can easily be found on that. We're happy to send that out to you. But for now, I'm going to turn over to my dear friend Ana, who's going to talk a little bit about now is the time for action, how to do that, and then we'll start to close out. Ana.
Sorry. Okay, there we go. Technology. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone who spoke earlier. A lot of time, great information. Yeah, so now that you heard all that and you're like, okay, where do I get started? How do I do things? First step, easiest step, it's yeah, the easiest step is to call the Senate. It doesn't have to be like a super prepared, um, yeah, it doesn't have to be super prepared statement. You can call, share your thoughts. Also keep an eye, as Lydia mentioned, to ballot initiatives in 2025, 2026. And if you would love to set up a meeting with a legislator or do some lobbying, a great way to get started is with us at SCAN. We Save the Children Action Network. We are the advocacy branch of Save the Children. So we focus on all things early childhood education and nutrition. And we'll share all these links with the slide afterwards. Yeah, if you can go to the next slide. Perfect. So, something in the big bill going on right now, it's a SNAP. There has been conversations about cutting SNAP, which includes cost sharing with states, meaning asking the states to pay for some of it. I'm not sure how the budget looks in California. I heard it's not amazing, but it is definitely not good here in Colorado. So we know the state could not pick up the bill to support SNAP, which will result in cuts. So kids not being able to get the food that they deserve. Yeah, other options on SNAP that they're considering is increase work requirements and just making it so much harder for folks to access them. In these links, you can send an email, super easy, couple of clicks. You can share on social media. Let's not forget that social media is a great advocacy tool, right? Just making sure your friends, family, and everyone on your algorithm is well educated about what's going on. And share your story to the press. Each newspaper is different. Most will take about 250 to 400 word letters that you can submit directly on their website. You just Google your local newspaper, letter to the editor, and the first link. One of the first links will be to submit a letter to the editor. If you need help, happy to help. We'll put your email, but yeah, Enola put an amazing guideline and research to writing your letter to the editor. So make sure you do that. Though, especially smaller papers will get your story and run with it. Similar for Head Start, right? Contact your legislator. We have a link you can use that will go with this slide, but also sharing your story with the press and making sure folks know how to how important Head Start is beyond just preschool and education, all the wraparound services that are included in it. So there's a ton of ways you can get involved. We've been through many of them, but we definitely want to make sure that it's easy for anyone that's interested. So I'll put my email in the chat if anyone wants someone to sit down with them and work through the process. Happy to do that. Yeah, and I think Mike will round us up.
Perfect. And so we just want to open it up for see if there's any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns. And if not, we will keep pushing and give back the gift of time, but we want to hold space for you all. Going once. Going twice. Okay, my friends. Thank you all for joining us. To close us out, I just want to, to close us out as we look at the end of our time together in this time and space. I want to remind us that right now we're ending, but it's not the end of our work. And if you've ever heard me speak, you'll know I often talk about legacy work, whether in my podcast or in the articles I write or in the break room at work. As an Afro-Caribbean, I often think and talk about what my ancestors provided for me that allowed me to be here today. And now as I work with young children, I think about what they will think of me in 30 years when our children are living through the social crisis of their lifetime. I ask myself, I wonder, will they look back just as I'm now looking to my ancestors for strength in this time? And will my children, their children ask, why didn't you show up? Will they see adults who simply hope things will get better? Or will they see a generation who rose to the moment with courage and conviction? Will they look at me? Will they look at you in your eyes and thank you for doing something? Just like my great-grandmother who left my grandfather with the idea of how to change the world. And just like my grandfather who left with my mom a desire to set the world ablaze. And just like the legacy my mom passed on to me that showed me Black boys deserve more than protection from harm. They deserve spaces to become whole, to cry and to giggle, to rage, to cuddle without shame. My question to you is, what legacy are you? What legacy are we leaving behind? Because here's the truth. We're all we got. The cavalry isn't coming. So how will we lift each other up in this moment of uncertainty and chaos? How will we take collective action rooted in dignity and clarity to secure a future worthy of our children? This is our call, our time to act thoughtfully, ethically, and with purpose, to stand firm in our values, and to build a future where every child has the freedom to thrive. Let's not wait for change. Let's be it. Thank you, and have a great night.